What's up, RotoBallers? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Jorden Hill. Week 9 is upon us, and it's time to set those winning lineups as we inch closer and closer to the fantasy playoffs. Today, we're going to be taking a look at RotoBaller's consensus half PPR rankings for Sunday and Monday's games, and pointing out a few players along the way that find themselves in particularly good or bad spots. Let's start things off at the quarterback position with number 12, Sam Howell. Howell was the fantasy QB1 last week, passing for nearly 400 yards and 4 touchdowns against the Philadelphia Eagles. The Commanders' offense has really been airing it out as of late, as Howell has attempted at least 40 passes in 4 of his last 5 games. He does have a relatively difficult matchup this week against the Patriots in Foxborough, but whether you've been starting Howell or just picked him up off of waivers, he's rolling right now and can remain in starting lineups. Up 2 spots at number 10, we have Derek Carr. Carr has received a fair share of criticism this season, and it hasn't always looked pretty, but he's actually been a top 15 fantasy QB in 4 straight games, and has thrown for over 300 passing yards in each of his last 3. This week, Carr will have a great opportunity to keep those streaks alive, as he'll battle the Chicago Bears, who have surrendered the 6th most fantasy points to quarterbacks. If you didn't spend up on one of the top QBs in your fantasy draft, Carr looks like one of the top streaming options on the week. And up at number 6, we have Tua Tagovailoa. Tagovailoa is currently the fantasy QB5 on the year, and he had a really nice game against the New England Patriots last week. There's a lot of excitement for Sunday's contest in Germany against the Chiefs, but just be aware that Kansas City's defense has been awesome this season, and they're allowing the 3rd fewest fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. Don't get me wrong, Tagovailoa remains a must-start option, as this game could have a lot of points scored, but don't be totally surprised if Tua, and this game as a whole, doesn't quite live up to the hype. Moving over to our running back rankings, at number 11 we have Joe Mixon. Mixon had his best game of the season in Week 8, totaling over 100 yards and finding the end zone against the San Francisco 49ers. He has an easier matchup this week against the Buffalo Bills, whose run defense hasn't been all that good this year. With Joe Burrow and this Bengals offense finally executing at a high level, we think fantasy managers can once again have confidence in Mixon as a top 12 option. Up just 1 spot at number 10 is DeAndre Swift. Since taking over the starting role in Week 2, Swift has been super consistent as he's finished as a top 15 fantasy back in 6 of his 7 games. This week, he'll take on the Dallas Cowboys, who have allowed the 9th fewest fantasy points per game to the position. It could be a difficult challenge, but Swift has been getting the lion's share of touches in Philadelphia's backfield, and he's been involved in the passing game as well. There's always plenty of upside in the Eagles' offense, so Swift will continue to be a must-start. And all the way up at number 1, we have Alvin Kamara. Kamara leads all running backs in targets this season, despite being suspended for the first 3 games. He's also averaging over 17 carries per contest, so he's been receiving a truly elite workload. We talked about the Bears being a great matchup for Derek Carr, but Kamara should feast as well, as Chicago allows the 6th most fantasy points, 3rd most receptions, and most receiving touchdowns to running backs. It's really no surprise at all that Kamara finds himself at the top this week. Taking a look at wide receivers, let's start at number 11 with Mike Evans. Evans was quiet for much of Week 8, but he salvaged his day with an incredible touchdown catch in the 4th quarter. He faces a tough Houston pass defense this week that has allowed just 2 receiving touchdowns to wideouts this year. Nonetheless, this should be a relatively close game, and I think the Bucs will want to make sure that Evans is more involved than he was last week. He also just has a really high ceiling as Baker Mayfield's favorite vertical target. Coming in at number 8, we have Cooper Kupp, who's been disappointing for 2 straight games and will be hoping to bounce back against the Green Bay Packers on Sunday. Unfortunately, he might be without quarterback Matthew Stafford, who's dealing with a thumb injury and is considered a game-time decision. With the Rams on bye in Week 10, it wouldn't be shocking at all to see Brett Rypien get the start. That being said, expectations must be lowered for this Rams offense, but with Puka Nacua also questionable to suit up, Kupp could be in line for a ton of targets, so it's really hard to imagine benching him. Moving up to number 5, we have CeeDee Lamb. Lamb exploded for 12 receptions, 158 yards, and 2 touchdowns last week as Dak Prescott played his best game of the season. Perhaps the Cowboys figured something out during their Week 7 bye, but they'll be carrying a ton of momentum into a divisional showdown with the Eagles. Philadelphia has been stout against the run, but has allowed the most fantasy production in the NFL to wide receivers, so Lamb is primed to go off once again. Rounding things out at the tight end position, at number 12 we have Gerald Everett. Prior to missing Week 8 with a hip injury, Everett scored in back-to-back weeks as a reliable target for Justin Herbert in the red zone. In his absence, Donald Parham found the end zone last week. Everett returned to a full practice this week and is expected to be active against the New York Jets, who surrender the 5th most fantasy points per game to tight ends. Coming in at number 6 is Kyle Pitts. Pitts started to get things going in weeks 5 and 6, but he's been slightly disappointing over his past 2 games. His matchup against the Vikings this week is middle of the road, but what makes Pitts an interesting option is the fact that Taylor Heineke will be throwing him the football. It's no secret that Desmond Ridder hasn't been great this season, so Heineke could be a noticeable upgrade. In addition, the Falcons will be without Drake London on Sunday, so we can expect Pitts to be heavily targeted. And finally, at number 5, we have Dalton Kincaid. The rookie scored his first career touchdown in Week 8 and has been thrust into a prominent role in Buffalo with Dawson Knox on injured reserve. His matchup this week against the Bengals is a juicy one, as Cincinnati has surrendered the most fantasy points per game to tight ends. Whether you've stashed Kincaid all season or scooped him up off of waivers, he has to be deployed as a starter for at least the next few weeks. Hope you guys enjoyed. Feel free to drop all your start-sit questions in the comment section down below. Also, please remember to leave a like on the video and subscribe to RotoBaller for a lot more fantasy football analysis that'll help you win big in 2023. Thanks so much for tuning in, and best of luck in your Week 9 fantasy matchups.